talking about German art in the 16th century, really enjoying or profiting from the legacy of Jan van Eyck and the Netherlandish or Flemish painters of the 15th century, who had really piloted that idea of using oil paint to render tiny, tiny details with great, great realism. And so as we looked at Holbein, Austrian artist active in London, working for the court of Henry VIII, we saw a very Van Eyck-like interest in exquisitely rendered details, perfectly rendered details. But using those details not just for decorative effect, right? Not just to show off, although I think that's part of it, not the hollow bone, the whole vine in the foreground, right? But not just for that, but rather also using it now to add to meaning, right? To include details that build up an overall symbolic effect. This is especially true in the ambassador's picture in London on the right. Now we're going to shift our way back to Holland, or the Low Countries, that is, to see what was going on there in the 16th century and what we find when we look at Flemish or Netherlandish art, right? Art of the Netherlands. I thought we were going to be band one called Never. This is what came from Michael Jackson's stage or something. Anyway, Netherlandish art, also known as Flemish, we see that same legacy of Van Eyck, that same interest in details. I updated this slide, and it sucks. I gotta fix that. It's in the Louvre, and I've been trying to find a really good scan of it. It just isn't one. And I haven't been to the Louvre with camera in hand in a long time, so we'll see how this all works out. But we see the same sort of interest in sort of tiny little details rendered exquisitely, even have to look through the pixelation to get this idea. I wanted to mention a bit about context. In the 16th century, the center of art production followed the center of commerce in the Low Countries. And the biggest city in the 15th century is in Bruges, or Van Eyck lived. But by the 16th century, the port in Bruges had pretty much closed down. They were having trouble keeping sand out of the estuary that led from the oceans to town. And the major center of art production shifted to the city of Antwerp, which I've marked on the map here. And that's where Quentin Matsuyke lives. That's where many of the artists that we'll look at from this region live. It was the primary center of art production in the 16th century. And it's because of the amount of commerce that's there. You need, in order to buy art, you need to have enough money to sort of feed the family first, right? And then have something left over. So we usually find art being produced at places where there is an amassing of wealth. And that's why we often talk about people like the Medici family when we're in Italy, right? They're the wealthiest people around. Or we talked about Duke Philip the Good of Burgundy, and prior to him, Duke Philip Bowles of Burgundy. Very wealthy men who have the money to buy a luxury item like a work of art. Right? In Antwerp, we have a great number of merchants who are equally wealthy, not equally wealthy, but wealthy enough to be buying works of art. And so this work actually relates directly to that context. Because what it shows is someone whose job it is to change money from one currency to another. And by doing so, charging a small fee, making money on that. And so we see him on the left, the money changer. And he's surrounded by bookkeeping artifacts with a shelf behind him, right? He's a businessman, keeping records. But he also is surrounded by incredibly beautiful objects, right? So you see he's counting out coins, and he's holding in his other hand. It's a little hard to see, I think, on the detail coming up next. I think, come on. Well, we'll come back to that slide in just a second. There. A close-up of his hand. He's holding a set of scales in his hand, right? And he's counting out coins. And the reason he's got a scale is simply to find out if the coins are worth what the marking says they're worth. Because our coins aren't worth squat, right? A dime is not 10 cents of metal in a dime. It's called, it's worth a dime because it says so. Right? It's not worth a dime because of the value of metal. However, in the 15th century, and prior, sort of take, 50 coins and turn them into 55 coins, right? He's weighing them to assure their value. Now, next to, so we've got the scale there, right? And you can see one of the pans is the coin, and the other pan is some metal shavings to see how much it should be worth. And in addition to this, you've got these other objects, a gold ink pot in front of it, some pearls, right? And a nice little felt cup, a bunch of rings on a cylinder, a crystal goblet, right? Kind of looks like the Arlequin wedding, doesn't it? There's a set of resin rosary beads back here, and in fact, there's also a convex mirror in the foreground, which also kind of reminds us of that. There's a good chance he knew that picture, right? So this really relates to that context. Here's a man whose job it is to change money from one currency to another, and Quentin Matsys has gone through and actually can make out the mid-marks. People who get into that can go in and see the different mid-marks and know that those are questions from different countries, right? Which is exactly the sort of thing that you would see in 16th century Antwerp, which is an international merchant community. And people would need this to change money from one person to the next. This goes back now to the slide I had that I sort of skipped by because I got ahead of myself. This scene of everyday life, notice that there doesn't seem to be much in the way of religious context here, right? This is one of the few non-religious pictures that we've seen so far. It's just a scene that you could see day to day in the city of Antwerp or in any major city in Northern Europe. The term we have for these scenes of everyday life is a genre scene, right? That's the sort of code word for that we use in our system. So the term genre means type, right? So landscape painting is a genre of painting. Right? Portrait painting is a genre of painting. Religion. But when we talk about genre painting without another descriptor, we're talking about scenes like this. Ordinary scenes of everyday life. And they really didn't exist that often, apart from portraiture, prior to the early 16th century. That's when we first began to see them. These scenes of everyday life. Now, with these scenes, there is more to it than simply recording what's going on around us, simply becoming interested in scenes that surround us. These come loaded with meaning as well. There's more to it than simply just, oh, there's a guy going about his job, right? And that more to it is, and this is true for almost all genre scenes, the thing that's going behind it is an allegory, a sort of a moral lesson about how to behave. And the two art pictures that went up today are both about that theme in other pictures as well. How to behave. Right? What to do. And so as we look at it, you'll notice that the picture is split between the two halves. You got his side and you got her side. Kind of like the Arlequin wedding again that we looked at before by Jan Tannert. On his side, the things of the world. On her side, prayer. And notice she's got a Bible open. And I got a detail coming up, but you can probably make out that the picture that you can see in the Bible is a picture of the Virgin Mary with Christ in her room, just like our God. That we started off last week, right? So each of them has their part in the relationship. Each of them has their side. But there's a moral lesson here. Look at what she's doing. If we look close at what she's doing, she's not reading the book. She's flipping through it the wrong way. She's flipping through it from back to front, right? She's got her book. It's just to hold her book and do it, right? She's got her hand on this side, so she's doing this. She's going backwards through the text. And if you look at her face, she's not paying any attention whatsoever to her prayer book. Now, I think that the moral lesson is there ain't nothing wrong with being interested in money. But don't pretend you're doing something else. Right? The moral lesson is that there's a time and a place for everything, and don't let your prayers be distracted by money. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with what he's doing. Being a money changer in itself is a necessary part of society. But if you're about to do your prayers, then don't let money distract you. And that seems to be a very, very strong part of this message. You'll notice in the mirror we can see a little man in a red turban, just like this thing, right? Different artist, but certainly showing that he's been looking at that. And if we look close, and I'm sorry this slide doesn't do it, like I said, I'm so funny with this hand. He's actually deeply reading the text, and he's holding it with a piece of cloth on his hands, and then he puts his book on that, which means it's the Bible. Right? So he's deeply engaged with reading. He's a positive example. You're looking in and you see yourself, right, reading. And he's doing what's right. She's doing what's wrong. There's a split between the two, right? So how do these pictures tell us how to behave? By showing us what not to do. It's a whole lot easier to tell people how to behave by showing them the repercussions of what happens when you do things wrong. Right? Over and above that, it becomes, once you see it, slightly more interesting by watching people misbehave. Behind her head, out the door, there's a little old man sort of talking to a very interested person in a hat outside the window on her side. These are usually identified as gossips. Sort of telling stories about somebody else. Now, how do we know that's different? Right? It is put on her side, which is the sort of the negative example side. Again, tying into this very misogynist idea that the women do things wrong where the men are okay. So, a genre scene with meaning, with a moral example. Down at the National Gallery, we have one of Max Price's best known and really, I think, one of his best pictures as well. The old Max Lovers. I just think it's really funny, too. Here's this creepy old, mole-faced, liver-marked guy who thinks this darling, young, well-dressed woman is all in it. Right? And he's been playing cards, he's sitting here probably at a tavern, and he's sort of like playing it up, right? And really what he's doing, right, is he's taking his money. So not only has he been gambling, he's probably losing, right? Because he's got that gesture, that's a court gesture back there with his open ears and that red hat that puts him forth as a gesture with his card, right? He's already been taking his money by cheating his cards. But now, as she lets him cop a deal, right? She's taking his wallet. You can see here underneath that she's handed off the bag of coins and said, like the card can just take it $2. We need to get this guy's money and get him out of here, right? And I love the fact, I know this picture since I moved here, and I've always really tried to like it because I love the way that he's reaching over her, I guess, that bag of goods. And she's brought his bag of goods, and he's handing it off to her head, because he cannot wait to get his hand on it. But on the back here, I realized that she is like pushing him away at the same time. It's sort of like, she's going to plan, she's going to let him grab her by the whatever, right? And he's moved in for a kiss with those ugly ass teeth, right? And she's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go there, right? I don't need to do that to take the money. And she's actually got her fingers pushing into his flesh at various places to keep him at a certain distance. So let him coddle her head, so let him grab her breast. That's enough to get him distracted enough that they can take his money. So again, moral examples. Why would a woman like that be interested in a guy like that? He thinks he's still hot, right? Obviously, it's just for the money. And the image is, again, a moral warning against, what do you want to say, playing out of your league, maybe, right? Becoming very aware of the fact that people who purport to be interested in you for romance might not always be. Ways not to behave. Another nice detail down here, we have coins on the counter. Her very swanky costume with the money bags being handed off I've always wanted somebody to tell me to look into card games so we can figure out what they've been playing. I've just always been interested in the idea that maybe it's important for us to see these cards, right? A 3 of hearts and probably a 6 of spades, something in clubs down below. What have they been playing? And I don't know enough about Renaissance card games to tell you for sure. These ideas about moral examples, how not to behave, and doing it with the, I guess, tongue-in-cheek, for lack of a better word, since we have a tongue stuck out in the math side. These are part and parcel of a great number of images from the 16th century, and very few artists are better at it than Peter Bruegel the Elder. I'm sorry, this is 1557, I think is the date, and I accidentally cut that off up above. Peter Bruegel the Elder, his son Peter Bruegel the Younger was also a painter, so we refer to him as Bruegel the Elder. He had a whole family of painters, not only his son Peter, but another son Jan Bruegel, and Jan had another son Jan, who was also a painter. So Peter the Elder is very much at the head of a whole family of artists. This one shows a series of euphemisms or sayings in Flemish, illustrated with pictures. And it doesn't add up to anything greater. It's just a series of things to spend some time looking at and saying, oh, maybe you shouldn't bang your head against the wall, like the guy in the lower left corner. Right? Now, this is one of the art fixes online, which goes through. There's some people count around 80, others count around 100 different sayings in Flemish that have been illustrated for us here. Sometimes there are 2 in a single vignette. So there's a little 10-minute or so thing online that goes into this in some depth. So we don't really need to talk about it here so much. It is, however, another genre scene. It looks like a scene of everyday life. These look like 15th century people. They're dressed in 15th century clothing, and they're going about everyday sorts of activities, and this comes with a very heavy undercurrent of moralizing symbolism. So every one of those scenes, and some of them are really rude. There's lots of people peeing and pooping everywhere you look. And so it's the art fix that swears, the one I put up today online. Bruegel did other kinds of genre scenes as well, and the most famous of these is this wonderful picture. There's next year, 18, is the 500th anniversary of his birth, I think it is. So there's a great big exhibition of this stuff coming up in Vienna, where the one on the right lives. They have quite a few Bruegels in Vienna. This one shows, just again, a scene of everyday life. There's a group of hunters in the lower left corner returning from their hunt. I've got a slightly better version of this picture coming up in just a second. But they're walking on this hill, and you'll notice in both pictures that Bruegel really likes the aerial view, where we have almost a bird's eye view, even with the hill that rises to these hunters in the lower left corner. We're still well in a tree above them, right, as they come back. And they're working their way through and back to the town. At the end of the hunt, it looks as if they've been relatively unsuccessful. And it seems as if maybe there's more to it than just that, although Bruegel loves to fill his landscape with incredible detail. Figures appearing everywhere in multitudes, and almost as if it's inviting you to dive in and pull out a magnifying glass, look at them one by one by one. Again, that Northern European, there's a slightly better version of it on the right. That Northern European interest in detail. I love those dogs. Well, I just love dogs, right? But these are great dogs. This is the one that's looking at us in the lower right corner of my teeth. It's like, can't you get me home out of the snow? And that haggard sort of wire-haired terrier at the top. And the footprints, right, of the hunters and their pack moving through the landscape as they all very shagged out, right? They're all really tired and at the end of the day, being out in the cold all day, and they can't wait to get home. And I think maybe here is our metaphor. Here is our moral example. They're steadfast. They're moving on. There's an inn over here. We can tell by the sign that this is in fact an inn. I believe I had a detail once where I could read that sign, but this one you can't. But they have a fire outside, and the fact that the sign is hanging there suggests that this is a place where they could stop, warm up, have a little grog, right? Have some beer, something warmer, on their way home. But no, they're going to walk right past it. They're steadfast on their path, which could very well be a moral example for us to bypass temptation when you have duties, when people are waiting for you, right? To see if you're safe, to see if you made it home okay after being out in the frigid cold. That maybe there's a better time to stop at the inn, and now is the time to be diligent, to be faithful like the dogs, and move your way past the inn. When we look at pictures from this period, images of inns, which are not only places for drink but also for sex, are often put on people's paths as a diversion by painters. And our good pilgrims move right past them. And that sure seems to be the case here. It's inviting, but they're not responding to the invitation. This was part of a series of pictures that Bruegel did. He did a series of 6 pictures for a banker in Antwerp. I think your text might give you his name. I'm not really all that concerned that you remember his name. But they've now been dispersed through a number of different collections. There are 2 in Vienna, 1 in Prague. Right? This one is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And each of the images seems to depict 2 months out of the year. So as a series of 6 pictures, they gave us the entire suite of activities over the course of a year. Right? So our picture, probably December, January. Usually we split the year around, not on New Year's Day, but around Easter instead. And certainly the activities that we see, as well as the way in which Bruegel manipulates all parts of the composition to get that time of year so well. Usually when I'm showing this picture in February, it's like colder than all heck outside, right? Now it looks a little bit more like the one from New York than the one from Vienna, but normally this time of year you guys could say, hey, look outside, everything is gray, blue, it just has that, and everything seems hard-edged and like the world is one big icicle, and that's what Bruegel captures in the work from your textbook. What we haven't captured this year so very well. But on the left, in the same way, in the middle of the summer, probably July, August, he captures the sense of the sort of the oppressive heat of that time of year, the swelteriness as the figure in the foreground takes a nap from his work, right? But again, each one of them showing activities that are relevant to the time of year that he's illustrating, which is a thing we've talked about before, the labors of the months. It goes back to medieval traditions where each month had activities that were associated with that particular month. And so for the 6 pictures, Bruegel goes back to that tradition. He worked for a publishing house and had every chance to be aware of these things, and uses the tradition of the labors of the month to instill the activities that we see surrounding each of these 6 pictures, each depicting 2 months. So we saw this already with the Limburg brothers, with the Très Riche Heure, on the left, where remember the harvesting was the labor of that month, or sowing seeds was, and we looked at the details that appear here for that. The rest of this calendar shows other activities for different months. The activity for December is traditionally, going back to the Middle Ages, is the hunt. So that tells us December. And the activity for January is the feast, which might account for the in the background that they're walking straight by. Right? Bringing in the activities from the month as part of this evocation of the entire year for the country estate of this wealthy banker from Ainsworth. Again, the Van Eyck-like details, in other words, the microscopic details of everyday life that appear in the background, kids playing games on the ice, pulling each other on sleds, playing what appears to be curling in the background, right? You see the curling iron. The Dutch actually invented the game of golf. They called it Kolf, K-O-L-F. And it was very unlike modern golf. Modern golf, you hit the ball a number of times to a hole. In Dutch, Kolf was played by two sticks, and you basically just had one whack at the ball, and you tried to get it to the other stick, was all you did. And normally it was played on the streets until kids started breaking windows and whatnot, and so they started banning it in the cities. And so it became a winter sport where they would play it on the ice because you need a flat surface. So the two kids that you see next to our curlers there are probably playing Kolf there, whacking the balls on the ice to try to get closest to the pin. Other details beyond play, we see work going on, a woman bringing thatch for starting fires, right? The hard work that needs to take place, which kind of adds to the idea of the hunters in the foreground, which themselves are also working quite hard, having come home at the end of this very, very long day. But again, as we move back deeper into the distance, we find all of these charming details of everyday life. Crack the whip, right? More figures doing ice fishing. You can see in the lower left corner here the holes that's been knocked in the ice. I love the dog, Indian dogs, trying to stand up on the ice, flipping around a bit as well. And then just other things, like how he captures the sense of deep, deep frost that permeates the entire landscape. And even the idea of observing very, very closely, observing very closely how snow falls into the trees and catching the snow on the upper parts of those trees. As we look into the distance, we see that it's very, very tightly observed, which again is the tradition that we trace all the way back to tonight. With that, we're going to move back to Italy for quite a while. And pick up what's going on in the Renaissance in Italy. We stopped with the early Renaissance in the 15th century. We're now going to trace it into the heart of the High Renaissance in the 16th century, leading our way up to some of the heavy hitters. Sorry about the slide coming up. Give me just a second here. I'm going to have a second to do this. I'm going to try to fix that. Give me just a second here so I can pull that back up again. Animation pane. Okay. There we go. We're going to be going back to Italy at the end of the 15th century and move our way into the 16th century. And the first artist that we'll look at here, because we're kind of talking about something altogether different now, is the artist Pollaiuolo. It's a tough spell, Pollaiuolo, a few too many vowels in a row. If you speak Spanish, you might recognize the first part of his name as being the word for chicken, pollo. His father was a chicken farmer before he became an artist, and so he's from a family of, and his brother was an artist as well. In the work, The Battle of the Ten Nudes, we see another engraving, which is what we talked about last week, the idea that you cut lines into a metal plate, usually copper, rub ink into those lines and then use a press to have the paper pull the ink out of the engraved lines, right? So Schongauer in Germany was our primary early proponent of engraving. Dürer picked it up as well. Pollaiuolo is one of the great engravers of the 15th century in Italy. His work is slightly earlier, but the Germans are really the ones that are on the forefront of this. Still, everyone in Europe is beginning to do engravings in the 15th century, which coincides with Gutenberg and the printing press as well. Right? It's all from the same time period. I wanted to look at the engraving style of these two different artists because they are very, very different. Schongauer loves to crosshatch, right? So he does a series of lines going one direction, here, and another series of lines coming the other direction across it, looking like a lattice work, like a piece of deck furniture maybe, or woven wicker, right? And you can see it everywhere. There's this crosshatching that builds up the tone. Pollaiuolo uses diagonal strokes, and a sort of layering of diagonal strokes that do not, on the norm, crosshatch at all. The only way tones vary is how deep and dark the lines are. So the ones in the background are deeper, that makes them darker, but they're not built up with a series of crosshatches. Everything is the diagonal line, and you can see that the lines start to get darker because he's engraved it that much deeper. Heavier. If you ever write with a felt pen and you push really hard, right, you can get a darker line out of it. Same thing with a pencil. This is exactly how Pollaiuolo is handling the engraver's tool, the burin, here. Now, why does that come up like that? There we are. The subject matter at hand is up for grabs. It seems to be almost like a genre scene in a way, in that we can't explain it. There seems to be no real narrative here. Just 10 men fighting. And some people have suggested that these are gladiators in training, which may well be the case. It's hard to say for sure. There's nothing to tie it down. One author pointed to the plants in the background and said that they're part of the standard gladiator's diet. I don't know if that's true or not. But if indeed they are gladiators, it shows an interest in Rome that is different from what we've seen before. As we talk about the Renaissance being the rebirth of ancient Rome, right? The rebirth of interest in Rome. What we saw was at the very start under Giotto, it meant realism. It meant naturalism, three-dimensionality, a sense of humanity. Okay? Then with Donatello, Fra Angelico, Castagno, Ghiberti, we started to see Levacchio. We started to see an interest in Roman body types, right? Contrapposto pose, that muscularity of ancient Roman figures, but putting them into Christian subjects. So a different phase. With Pollaiuolo and with others that we'll be looking at, we start to see an interest in Roman subject matter as well. Sort of the third phase of the Renaissance, where now they're taking Rome at face value. They're taking Rome for what Rome is, and starting to become interested in it for its own sake, right? Without trying to put it into some sort of Christian narrative. Right? So it's a new way of looking at ancient Rome. Now, as we look at the 10 fighting figures, one of the things that's always fascinating me, and I've never seen anybody really sort of dive into this too much. Notice the central two figures that are holding the chain and fighting each other. So you can't drop the chain, right? You can't get too far from each other as you fight with the sword. You notice, if you look at those two figures, that they're basically the same pose, but one seen from the front and one seen from the back, right? So it's almost as if Pollaiuolo is saying, I'm making in two-dimensional art what a sculptor makes in three-dimensional art. I'm allowing you to see the figure from multiple sides at once. And then they sort of just got into that idea of seeing the same figure twice and directly behind them. starts to look very much like the same pose, but one seen from the back and the other one seen from the front. And then how many times do we see that, where we see not maybe exactly the same, but very similar poses, these two guys, seen from different angles, right? The two guys on the ground, seen from different angles. The man with the arrow here, with his back arch, one leg forward, the other back, and the fellow with the axe. Variations of the same pose. So he seems to be repeating these poses again and again, almost as a two-dimensional artist. He's showing us how good he is in three dimensions. And in fact, Polaiolo was a sculptor as well, so he did understand three-dimensional figures. Right? He made works of art in 3D. This work, I think, is intended as an advertisement for that. Here's Polaiolo, someone who can work really well in three dimensions, who understands human anatomy, who is interested in ancient Rome, and is signed in the upper left corner, the work of Antonio Polaiolo of Florence. It tells us where to find him. This is something we talked about with Durer's print of Adam and Eve. Also a showcase print, as good as anybody could ever do, and tells us if we want to find the artist, where should we look? Prints, because they're on paper, because they can be banged out with the printing press, multiple from the same matrix, they can travel. They can be folded up and put in your pocket, put into a purse. Paintings stay put. Sculptures stay put. Right? They're too heavy to travel with. But prints move around. And Polaiolo seems to know that. That this print seems to be designed to show off exactly what he's best at. And to let people who might come across it know where to look for him if they wanted to find more works from him. So it also shows us at the same time this great interest in, or increased interest in Roman subject matter. Non-Christian Roman subject matter. These two works continue that idea. Two works by Botticelli. Now we have about 6 or 7 Botticellis down in the National Gallery. Somebody's working on at least one of them. But these are probably the two most famous works by Botticelli from around the same time, almost the same dimensions, but interestingly on different supports. The one on the left is painted on a wooden panel. The one on the right is on canvas, which presents us some problems. That means they were probably not designed to be preserved together. Otherwise, they would have done them both on the same kind of material, both on panel, right? And at this point in history, Italian painters painting on canvas are usually doing them as temporary work, not intended to be preserved. Which, for as famous as this is, right? It's hard to think, well, take the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is never meant to be a permanent work. That was the exhibition tower. It's going to be torn down, but people liked it too much, right? Probably the same thing happened here in the smaller context. You know, it's such a great picture that it was kept. But if you look at them side by side, notice how much more detail there is to the one on the left. Look at all of the background details, how tightly packed it is, with individually painted leaves and flowers and along the ground as well. And whereas the famous Birth of Venus is really very simple. Figures are outlined against a fairly simply painted background. And again, that suggests maybe something temporary, like a decoration somewhere that someone saw the value in and decided to keep. Now, both of these works were probably commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici, who was the grandson of Cosimo. We looked at Cosimo de' Medici when we talked about Italy before. What do you want to call him? The godfather of Florence, right? The head of the Medici family, had really controlled Florentine politics in the 1430s, 1440s. Mostly working behind the scenes to have his friends elected to Florentine government. Lorenzo is his grandson, and the Medici have maintained power over the generations. Okay? Lorenzo's known by the nickname Lorenzo the Magnificent. That was his nickname in Florence. And both of these works were probably originally seen in the Medici Palace in Florence. They were still there together 50 years later. Okay. Now, as works that were commissioned for the Medici, they're personalized for them. We're going to focus on the birth of Venus instead of the Primavera on the left. The image of Venus that we see here is based on a statue that the Medici owned, an old Roman statue of Venus that was in the palace where these paintings would both be seen. And so as she comes floating to shore, clothed only in her hair, you'll notice that the poet is a derivation of, if not a pretty close quote of, this old Roman type. This is called the modest Venus, because she's more or less trying to cover herself up, right? But certainly this is the basis for Botticelli's work. And it shows us the legend of how Venus was born. Now, Venus was born in a rather violent manner. Here's a close-up. The god of time, Kronos, castrated another of the planetary gods, Uranus, and took his testicles and threw them into the ocean. Right? Did we talk about this in this class? I'm teaching a Renaissance art class, upper division. I can't remember who's over what. Testicles of Uranus cast into the ocean. That mixing of the gods, particularly the god semen, and the earth gave birth to Venus out of the ocean, miraculously, right? And she is then blown to shore, standing on, right, a conch shell, a scallop shell, right? Venus on the half shell. And we see on the left two wind gods blowing her to shore. If you're into this sort of thing, and the Medici were, they're identifiable as Zephyr and Aura. And the birth of Venus from, the goddess of love coming out of the ocean is seen as the return of springtime. And so the figure on the right that welcomes her is, in fact, an allegory of spring itself, right? About to throw a robe on her shoulders to cover up her nakedness. So she doesn't have to do it with her hair anymore. Right? Notice the flowers everywhere. As Zephyr and Aura blow her to shore, roses scattered with them as they come in from the upper left. Here is the goddess of spring. We know she's the goddess of spring by how she's dressed. She's totally covered in plants. There are little purple flowers that decorate her, looks like a nightgown. But there are also laurel wreaths around her shoulders, more rose. I guess that would kind of hurt, wouldn't it? A belt of roses wrapped around her waist, and you can see this mountain collar of the rose that she's about to place over Venus' shoulders to cover her nakedness. This is spring herself, right, welcoming Venus now to Earth. And now that Venus comes to Earth, the Earth will give forth its bounty. Right? That's the allegory here. Now, this is, again, very, very Roman, right? This is very non-Christian, pagan even, if you will. The Roman goddess of love being blown to earth and welcomed by springtime. This is the sort of thing that Lorenzo de' Medici and the Medici family were quite into. They had been studying Roman mythology. In fact, the Medici family supported a school of sorts, a reading group, that met in the Medici Palace, called the Florentine Academy. And this was a very learned group. They got together to study multiple ancient texts and compare them to medieval religious texts and look for similarities between different mythologies. Right? The mythologies of ancient Rome, the theology of medieval Europe, and see certain parallels. For them, Venus was a parallel to the Virgin Mary. Venus was born when a god melded with Earth. She was not born in the standard fashion. Venus's son is Cupid, right? Who helps spread love through the earth. These two things were a direct parallel to the Virgin Mary. There's a fairly new theological concept in the 15th century that Mary herself was born from a virgin. The idea of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. That in order to be sinless and give birth to sinless Christ, she was born of a virgin as well. Her mother, St. Anne, had a similar experience to Mary. That's a fairly new idea at this time. That helps to link her to Venus. The Virgin Mary and Venus are both born miraculously through the intervention of God. Both Mary and Venus have a son who helps spread love through the world. These sorts of parallels are exactly the sorts of parallels that the Florentine Academy focused on. And the head of this group was a man named Marsilio Ficino, a theologian/philosopher, who, under the support of Lorenzo de' Medici, was helping to spread the exact sorts of ideas I'm talking about here. Right? The birth of Venus in the spring. Right? Rebirth in the spring. The Annunciation happens in the spring. The resurrection of Christ happens in the spring. Yeah? Numerous connections between ancient Roman mythologies and Christian theology of the Middle Ages. That's part and parcel of this new interest in Rome, is its parallel with Christianity. Now, this idea that Mary is a metaphor for Venus, Venus is a metaphor for Mary, right? They parallel each other. That's picked up in Filippo Lippi's Madonna and Child from the National Gallery as well, where we see that the arch behind her head is in fact a conch shell, right? So that's the reason that's there. She has a pearl in the middle of her forehead to add to this idea. So these ideas are out there. One last thing about Lippi, he was Botticelli's teacher. Right? Botticelli studied in the studio of Filippo Lippi. Artists at that point didn't go to art school, right? They apprenticed under another artist. And if you look at the face of Venus, we can see a certain similarity in features, the long, thin nose, the tight mouth, the drawing of those almond-shaped eyes that is really very similar to Filippo Lippi, because that's where he studied. Now, we'll wrap up today by talking about one last work by Botticelli and the story behind it. Here is Lorenzo de' Medici's little brother, Giuliano de' Medici. Right? So we're in this third generation of Medici leaders of ancient, of Renaissance Florence. Right? Started with Cosimo, these are his grandsons. Lorenzo on the one hand, who commissioned the birth of Venus for his nephew's wedding, and Giuliano on the left, Lorenzo's little brother. They are the next generation of Florentine leaders. They're both at this time around 20, 25. And as you can see, have all of the power and cockiness that comes with it. Right? This particular image shows Giuliano posed in front of an open window. One door of the window is open. We can see there's no landscape behind it to be seen, but you can see that Botticelli has gone to the trouble of drawing out this stone opening that the shutters close over on the outside. So we have to imagine that those open windows are an important element of the composition. His clothing is also part of that. It helps to set up his status. And as you can see in the lower left corner, there is a bird on a branch as well. These are the only elements that Botticelli has included in the image. And they certainly add up to a certain sense of meaning. What it is a reference to death. Open windows are a reference to the great beyond. We find them often in paintings where the open window suggests the great beyond. By the way, there was an article about 2 years ago on the Arnolfini portrait that thought that maybe she's dead and he's saying goodbye, and the open window beyond him. Right. But neither here nor there. In this case, the open window beyond may well be a reference to his departed lover. Giuliano was deeply in love with this woman named Simonetta Vespucci of the Vespucci family, the famous world-exploring Vespucci family, Amerigo's family, right? He was in love with this girl named Simonetta, and she had recently died. So it's been suggested that not only is the open window a reference to the great beyond that she has departed to, but also the dove resting on a branch can also be seen as a reference to that. Doves mated for life. They were faithful even after death. And here it's perched on a dead branch, eternally faithful to memory. So these two elements add to the meaning of Giuliano de' Medici, right? And it may well be in reference to the death of a lover, very recent death of a lover. Now, the other option is that it was actually commissioned posthumously, and both of these things refer to the death of Giuliano. Giuliano. Giuliano was murdered in 1478. And this may well have been commissioned by his family to honor his memory. That doesn't mean that she's out of the picture, so to speak. But there may be more to it than that. It may be about his death as well. This is one of the great stories from the Renaissance. Something I didn't know about until a few years back was the death of Giuliano de' Medici. This really is a fantastic story. You can't make this stuff up. The Medici family, because they were in control of Florence, had a number of enemies. People who didn't like the way that they were running Florence, didn't like them working behind the scenes to manipulate things in their own favor. And one of their primary enemies in the city were the Pazzi family. And the Pazzi family in the 1470s decided they kind of had their fill. They were done with the Medici. They wanted them out of power. And so they started to conspire with other Medici enemies to figure out a way to get them out of power. And they realized the only way to do it was to cut off the lineage. And that meant in the 1470s that they would have to get rid of both Giuliano and Lorenzo, the two sons, right, the two heirs. If you got rid of one of them, it doesn't help. You need to get rid of both of them. And they realized they were never going to unseat them, so they were going to kill them. This sounds just like gangland stuff, doesn't it? Sounds like The Godfather, right? And in fact, this story, I think, is so parallel to that in a lot of ways. So they get together with other Medici haters, and they conspire to get rid of Giuliano and Lorenzo at the same time. So even if they got rid of one of them, the other one would put up his guard, and there'd be no way, right? And as they begin to conspire, they figure out that they've got to catch them with their guard down. The Medici are just too well protected, they're too strong, they can't just walk up on the street and get away with anything. So they decide, has anybody heard this story before? They decide to kill him in church on Easter Sunday morning. At the moment that the priest blesses the sacrament, and all eyes are focused on the host that he elevates as they ring the bell, right? And the priest proclaims, "This is the body of Christ which is broken for you." They figure that's the time that their minds are elsewhere. It's Easter Sunday. Their thoughts are elsewhere. All we got to do is get next to him in the church, right? And we'll get him with the panic, right? This is the conspiracy. Can't make this stuff up, right? So they get it all worked out. They're hiding in the back. They're hiding in the sacristy, which is where the priest prepares the communion, right? He's already come out. The priest has come out. He's with the communion. They're hiding back there. And they know that as soon as the priest rings the bell, they can come out of the side doors, right, and everybody else is paying attention. And that's exactly what happens, right? A bell rings saying that they've commissioned, the priest has blessed the sacrament. That's the cue to the Pazzi to come out of the back room with their knives. And they do. And the Medici see them. Lorenzo and Giuliano see them. They start to flee, right? They jump out of their pews and run away. But the problem was that Lorenzo and Giuliano had been out partying the night before. And Giuliano twisted his ankle the night before. So as they got up to run away, he can't. He's limping. And they kill him on the floor of the cathedral with knives. Lorenzo gets away, right? The conspiracy is only half successful, which is to say it's not successful at all, right? Because they needed to get them both. Lorenzo goes apeshit. I mean, he unloads on them, right? And this is where, did you ever see the first Godfather? There's this scene at the end when Michael's baptizing his son, right, or having his son baptized in the church. And at the same time, he's whacking every member of the other 5 families in New York. And you just see this crosscut between the priest blessing and all of everybody else is being like that. They're getting garroted around the neck, they're getting shot, they're getting knifed. That's what Lorenzo does. He exacts revenge on the Pazzi. He has all of the women and children banished from town, and he has all of the men killed. Right? 2 ahead, every single one of them. And he asked all of the rest of the people of Florence to show their allegiance to him and his family. At which point, portraits are commissioned that people put up in their homes to show that they are Medici people. Right? Now, we talked about the importance of this when we looked at the statue of David from down at the National Gallery. Right? That might well be a testament to Medici collusion, if you will, right? Medici friendship. These portraits became also portraits that were intended to show fidelity to the family. Our portrait is one of 3 or 4 different ones, almost exactly the same. Ours is the best, which is nice. But the other ones around the world all suggest that people began to commission portraits, perhaps from a prototype, to put in their houses to show that they are Medici friends in the aftermath of the Pazzi conspiracy. The other thing people did was to put up portraits of Lorenzo. And we know that there was a master portrait made in wax by Andrea del Verrocchio, and other copies were made after it. That wax original is missing. The best copy made after it is also down at the National Gallery. And this is the Lorenzo who has just stomped out his enemies. And I don't know about you, but he looks pretty badass to me, right? Grimacing and scowling in the aftermath of the death of his little brother, right? Like I said, you can't make this stuff up, right? The story of the Pazzi conspiracy and the Medici retaliation, all of this taking place just a few years before our birth of Venus, where times seem to be significantly happier. Well, that's the last slide I got today. So here's the thing. I will update the slide list when I get home, right? Be sure that you go back and look at those 2 new art fixes. One of them is in 2 parts since the work of art is so complex, they couldn't fit it into just one. So be sure to play them back. Those are for the exam. If you have any last-minute questions on the exam, I'll be in my office most of the day on Thursday, but I have to give someone a makeup exam at 2 o'clock because she's going on one of the study abroad trips. So otherwise, I'll see you guys on Thursday night. Be sure to bring writing implements with you because you'll need those. I won't have a whole box of pens with me, okay? Good luck studying, and let me know if you have any problems and have any questions you need answered.